Hi guys, what do you think it actually smelled like at the foot of Mount Olympus? Not ambrosia probably, more like sheep, damp stone, and olive oil gone slightly sour in the sun. You walk along a dirt path that curls upward through the lower slopes of Pieria. The mountain looms above you, half shrouded in that familiar Greek haze, the kind that blurs the line between cloud and smoke. Farmers say that's where the gods live. You squint, trying to see something divine up there, but all you get is the faint shimmer of heat. The cicadas have decided you need a soundtrack. Their endless droning, building into a sleepy kind of symphony. You keep walking, feeling the dust cling to your sandals, the air heavy and still. If you've ever wondered what Olympus was really like, this is it. Not thunderbolts or winged horses, but the slow, stubborn heartbeat of ordinary Greece. And before we climb any further, a small warning. You probably won't make it through this day, but that's all right. The point isn't to survive it, it's to drift through it. If you're enjoying this slow trip into the ordinary magic of history, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this little corner of the internet keep breathing, and maybe leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I like imagining people scattered across the world falling asleep to the same story. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You pass a group of shepherds sitting under a twisted fig tree. One of them glances up and nods. The polite, unbothered nod of someone who spent his entire life near a mountain that supposedly houses immortals. He doesn't look impressed. Maybe he's used to the idea that gods don't really visit anymore. Or maybe he knows better than to say it aloud. The real Olympus, the one you can touch, rises to nearly 3,000 meters. The highest peak, Mythicus, often disappears behind rolling clouds. The ancient Greeks couldn't see the summit most days, so they filled that gap with imagination. Zeus's palace, a clever way of explaining why lightning liked to strike up there. A breeze stirs the tall grass, carrying the scent of time and something faintly metallic, maybe the bronze tools of a nearby forge. You pause, half expecting the clang of Hephaestus's hammer. Instead, it's just a villager repairing a plowshare, wiping sweat from his brow. He tells you, without looking up, that Olympus isn't really for humans. The gods don't live on it. They live through it. The mountain is like a curtain between what is and what could be. Then he laughs softly and says, "Still, it's a good place to get away from taxes." Historians still debate whether the Greeks thought Olympus was a literal home of the gods, or more a poetic metaphor. Most likely, it was both. The mountain was both there and not there. A divine real estate investment, visible from most of northern Greece. You reach a small shrine built from limestone blocks. Its roof sags a little, and the offerings, clay figurines, cracked bowls, a few sprigs of dried laurel, look like they've been there since the last rainstorm. But someone keeps tending it. A faint smell of burnt honey lingers in the air. Bees circle lazily, sacred as they always are in old stories. One major fact about Olympus: it wasn't just a symbol in mythology. It was also a place of real pilgrimage. People from surrounding regions made small climbs, leaving offerings for Zeus and the Muses. Some even claimed to hear voices in the wind, probably just the wind, but we won't ruin their day. An obscure little tidbit: ancient travelers sometimes left cheese as an offering at rural shrines, not because it was fancy, but because it was easy to carry and considered wholesome. Somewhere in the dust near your feet, a forgotten piece might still be mummified into immortality. You sit on a stone, tracing patterns in the dust. The light softens. For a brief, shimmering second, you imagine you hear laughter echoing from above. Distant, airy, amused. Maybe it's just the mountain talking to itself. You let your eyes drift upward again. The clouds have turned gold around the peak, and for the first time, you almost understand why they thought gods lived there. Not because of lightning or power, but because of how unreachable it feels. How beautiful things always seem slightly out of reach. Somewhere down the slope, a donkey brays. A sharp, comic reminder that the divine and the ridiculous have always been neighbors. You stand, stretch, and keep walking toward the thin trail that leads higher. The air cools, carrying the faint music of goat bells and maybe, if you listen closely enough, the hum of something older than history. By morning, the air is thinner, the path narrower. You pass the line where trees give up trying to live. Only rock and scrub remain, stubborn, silent things that seem to understand eternity better than humans ever could. The villagers back down in the plains call this place the shoulder of Zeus. They say when it rains here, it's because he's shaking off the dew. You suspect it's just weather, but you smile anyway. A little superstition never hurt anyone, except maybe the philosophers, and even they secretly checked the sky before traveling. You pause to rest, sitting beside a trickle of water that disappears into the stones. The sound is soft, almost shy. In myths, every spring had a name, every stream a spirit. If you were an ancient poet, you'd probably dedicate a line or two to this one. Instead, you splash your face and wonder if the gods ever had to deal with mosquitoes. A shepherd's whistle drifts up from far below, echoing strangely against the cliffs. You think of how sound carries differently here, as if Olympus itself listens. Here's your historical anchor. The first recorded ascent of Mount Olympus wasn't until 1913, long after the myths had turned to memory. For over 2 millennia, no one dared climb all the way up, partly out of reverence, partly out of the very sensible fear of falling off. So when ancient Greeks talked about Olympus, they weren't describing a place they'd seen. They were describing a place they'd felt. That might be the truest kind of geography there is. An obscure cultural detail. Greek farmers sometimes left a jar of olive oil outside overnight before a journey to let the moon bless it. The oil was used later to anoint the traveler's forehead, a little homemade protection spell against bad weather and worse luck. If you'd been around back then, you'd probably have a shiny forehead by now. You keep climbing, the wind tugging gently at your tunic. Below you, the Aegean glimmers faintly through the haze. That same blue seen by generations before you, unchanged and uncaring. You start to understand why myths stuck so well here. The landscape practically demands storytelling. At a bend in the trail, you find a carved stone. The inscription has been mostly eaten by time, but a few letters remain. Enough to make out a dedication to the muses of Pieria. You imagine the poet who left it here, sweaty, sunburned, and determined to be remembered. Maybe he believed they'd grant him inspiration, or maybe he just needed an excuse for a scenic hike. Historians still debate whether such dedications were made by professional poets or local villagers trying their luck with divine networking. Either way, you appreciate the effort. Even gods like a little flattery now and then. As you walk on, clouds drift lower. The world becomes quieter, wrapped in mist. There's something deeply calming about being inside a cloud, like stepping into a thought that hasn't fully formed. You listen to your own breath, to the faint crunch of gravel, to the distant creak of the earth settling. It occurs to you that Olympus isn't really about gods at all. It's about humans needing somewhere to aim their wonder, a mountain tall enough to hold their hopes. A small lizard darts across the path, pausing to give you what feels suspiciously like judgmental eye contact. You nod back respectfully. Everyone on Olympus deserves acknowledgement, even the tiny ones. Somewhere far below, thunder rolls, slow, deliberate, like a reminder that stories never die. They just echo in different ways. You keep walking. The mist thickens. For a moment, you can't tell where the world ends and the sky begins. Maybe that's the point. Maybe this is what the ancients meant by divine. Not something distant, but something that blurs the line between what you can touch and what you can only imagine. The air smells of wet stone and thyme. You inhale deeply, the coolness filling your chest. You think, almost sleepily, if the gods were real, they'd probably take naps right here. You wake to the sound of sheep bells and the smell of smoke. Someone's cooking down the slope. Barley porridge, maybe, thickened with olive oil and the faint sweetness of figs. You half consider wandering down to ask for some, but then again, that would mean walking downhill, and you've come far enough that turning back feels almost unholy. A thin trail of smoke rises from a small stone hut, tucked into the slope, like it's trying not to be noticed. You wander closer. The roof is thatched, the walls patched with old mud and newer gossip. A woman squats beside a clay oven, stirring something in a blackened pot. She looks up and grins, the kind of grin that says, "You're not from around here, but I'll let you stay as long as you don't get in the way." "Pilgrim?" she asks, half suspicious, half amused. You nod. It's easier than explaining. Inside the hut, there's a simple shrine, a small clay figure of Hera, perched on a ledge, her paint mostly faded. Around her feet lie offerings, a bronze hairpin, a dried fig, and what looks suspiciously like a seashell. Hera, Queen of Olympus, apparently accepts whatever she can get. You sit outside while the woman ladles porridge into a chipped bowl. She tells you her husband's been tending sheep on the mountain for 20 years. He says the gods live up there, she adds, jerking her chin toward the clouds. But if they do, they've got bad manners. Never visit, never help with taxes. You smile. There's something endearingly human about her tone, reverent and annoyed all at once. Here's your historical anchor for the day. Ancient Greeks practiced domestic religion far more than temple worship. Most prayers, offerings, and rituals happened at home. Small shrines like this one, smoke curling up from clay altars that smelled more of family than ceremony. Olympus was sacred, yes, but so was the kitchen corner, where you lit a little flame and whispered a hope. An obscure cultural tidbit. Women often dedicated their old combs and hairpins to Hera after marriage, symbolic acts of passing from youth to adulthood. It wasn't exactly romantic, but it got the job done. You look again at the shrine inside the hut and spot 2 hairpins gleaming faintly in the dim light. Someone here believed in that old ritual. Outside, the day hums with slow contentment. The sheep graze lazily, bells chiming in half-random rhythm. A lazy dog blinks at you from a patch of sun. The air is warm enough to make you yawn. You imagine the gods watching from somewhere above, bored but benevolent. Maybe Zeus yawns too. The woman asks if you've ever actually seen the top of Olympus. You shake your head. Neither have I, she says, ladling another spoonful of porridge into her bowl. But my grandmother swore she saw a flash of gold there once. Said it was Apollo polishing his lyre, or maybe it was lightning. Depends on who you ask. Historians still debate whether local villagers genuinely believed Olympus was inhabited, or whether it was more of a poetic symbol, a divine address for the sake of storytelling. Evidence suggests a bit of both. Faith, after all, is rarely tidy. You thank her and continue walking, the path now narrowing into loose gravel. The sound of your steps changes, no longer dusty, but crisp and echoing. Above, gulls wheel faintly against the sky. Even this far inland, you wonder what they're doing here. By afternoon, the air shifts, cooler, quieter. The mountain begins to hum in that subtle way old places do, where silence feels alive rather than empty. You pass a cluster of small votive stones, half buried in moss. The offerings, tiny terracotta feet, hands, eyes, are worn smooth by time, each one a prayer for healing. Someone once climbed all this way because something hurt. You pause beside one of the stones. A faint drizzle begins, barely more than mist. The world blurs a little. You can't help but think, this must be what faith feels like. Damp, quiet, a little uncertain, but steady. As you walk on, you notice how the air carries sound differently now. Every clatter of pebble feels monumental, every breath amplified. It's like being inside a bell made of cloud. And in the back of your mind, a small thought flickers. If this mountain really does belong to the gods, maybe it's less about where they live, and more about reminding you to look up once in a while. By evening, you find another hut. This one empty, its roof caved in, its hearth cold. You step inside anyway. Someone long ago scratched words into the wall. For those who climb without offering. You don't know if it's a warning or a joke. Probably both. You sit, pull your cloak tighter, and watch the last light fade behind the ridges. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howls, long and low. Then silence. You think of the woman, of her shrine and her hairpins, and wonder if she ever still looks up the mountain at night, hoping for a glimmer of gold. Sleep comes quietly, like mist curling under the door. Dawn arrives, not as a burst of light, but as a pale exhale. You step outside and see the world tinted in faint rose and silver. The mountain looks softer in the morning, almost kind. For a moment, you forget how steep it is. You follow a trail edged by centuries of footsteps, shepherds, travelers, and the occasional philosopher who thought a little altitude might bring enlightenment. The path winds toward a small village, nestled in a hollow between ridges. Smoke curls from chimneys, roosters complain, and someone is already shouting about bread prices. Civilization, at last. The village is called Dion, though in truth, there were several Dions scattered across Greece, all dedicated to Zeus. This one clings to the lower shoulder of Olympus, where the divine starts to blend with the domestic. Historical fact, Dion was a real sanctuary site in Macedonia, famous for festivals honoring Zeus and the Muses. Archaeologists have found theaters, temples, and even bathing complexes there, a place where faith and entertainment merged. As they often do, the villagers you meet don't seem in awe of the mountain. To them, Olympus is less a mythic throne and more an unreliable neighbor who sends thunder at inconvenient times. Still, every spring they host the Dionysia, a festival mixing wine, plays, and spontaneous dancing. You can't help but think it sounds suspiciously like modern weekends. You pass through a small marketplace. The stalls sell honey cakes, olive oil, dyed wool, and an alarming quantity of onions. A merchant waves you over, insisting that his onions are blessed by Hermes himself. Swift to peel, slow to spoil. You're not sure if that's theology or marketing, but you buy one anyway. At the village square, a group of children chase a goat wearing a garland of ivy. "The goat's the guest of honor," says an old man, leaning on his staff. "Don't worry, he'll get his turn at the wine later." You sit beside him as he talks. His voice drifts like a cracked lyre. Rough, but melodic. "You think the gods live up there?" he asks, gesturing to the peaks lost in cloud. You shrug. "They live where people remember them," he says, tapping his temple. "Otherwise they just fade like morning mist." An obscure cultural tidbit. During certain festivals, Greek villagers believed the gods temporarily descended into statues or masks. Ordinary people carried these representations in processions, offering them food and music as if entertaining visiting relatives. Imagine throwing a block party because you thought Zeus might be in a good mood. Historians still debate whether these processions were purely symbolic or genuinely spiritual experiences. But as you watch the villagers light torches, their faces glowing in the firelight, it's hard to call it mere play acting. Belief has a way of turning pretend into real. You join the evening meal. Bread dipped in oil, roasted vegetables, and a cup of wine that could politely be described as bold. Laughter drifts through the air, mingling with the crackle of torches. The goat, now slightly tipsy, bleats triumphantly before attempting to climb a barrel. Everyone cheers. For a moment, Olympus doesn't feel far away at all. It feels like it's sitting right here among the villagers. In their laughter, their stories, their stubborn joy. The old man beside you chuckles. People say the gods sit on clouds, but I think they just sit where it's warm and someone's got bread. You can't argue with that logic. Later, as the stars emerge, bright and sharp in the thin air, you walk toward the edge of the village. The sky stretches endlessly above, the mountain rising dark against it. You think of Dion's theaters, where actors once wore masks of gods, and realize something quietly profound. Maybe Olympus wasn't meant to be reached. Maybe it was meant to be rehearsed. You lie down in the grass just beyond the torch's glow. The sound of music fades behind you. Crickets start their nightly chorus. The air smells of thyme, smoke, and faintly sour wine. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmurs again. A soft, lazy kind, as if the gods are laughing in their sleep. You close your eyes, feeling the hum of the earth beneath you, and drift toward dreams, half convinced you'll wake tomorrow among clouds. By the next morning, you're awake before the sun. The village still sleeps, but smoke drifts lazily from one or two hearths. The earliest risers, probably bakers or old men who never managed to sleep past dawn since the Peloponnesian War. You shoulder your cloak and begin walking again, leaving Dion behind. The path climbs steadily, switching from dirt to stone. You pass a grove of cypress trees, where the air smells faintly of resin and rain. Birds chatter in the branches, each call bright and pointless, like gossip in a marketplace. Halfway up the slope, you find what looks like a shrine, but smaller. Quieter, a low altar of uncut rock, the remnants of ash in its hollow, and the faint shimmer of coins wedged between cracks. Someone's been here recently. Historical fact: mountain altars were common throughout ancient Greece, especially on high ridges or isolated peaks. These were called bomoi, and travelers often stopped to make small offerings to Zeus Kataibates, Zeus who descends, the god of lightning and unexpected appearances. The concept feels fitting. Lightning is, after all, the most dramatic form of divine visitation. You crouch near the altar and notice something curious. A single clay figurine, shaped roughly like a goat. The offerings crude, but charming. The kind of thing made by hands that cared more about meaning than perfection. An obscure tidbit. Some rural Greeks believed that goats could smell divinity. They'd bleat before storms, sensing Zeus's approach, which honestly makes them better meteorologists than most philosophers. The air grows thinner as you climb. The silence deepens, filled only by the steady crunch of your sandals and the occasional rustle of wind. You pause to catch your breath and glance back. From here, the world below looks flattened and unreal. The fields like green quilts, the villages like forgotten thoughts. For a moment, you wonder how many people in all of history have stood where you're standing, staring up at the same peaks, feeling that same small tug of awe. Probably not many. Most stayed below. Safer that way, even in myth. Few mortals dared approach the divine directly. Look what happened to poor Semele. You keep walking, the path narrowing into a line of rough stones that lead toward a cluster of ruins. Pillars lie scattered like old bones, their marble surfaces cracked and stained by centuries of weather. A single carved block remains upright, its inscription worn but still legible. To Zeus of the open air. You run your fingers along the letters, feeling the grooves like faint veins. Someone once carved this by hand, maybe kneeling on this same rock. The idea makes you feel quietly connected, a little thread of time stretching between you and whoever stood here 2,000 years ago, squinting against the same sun. Historians still debate whether such sanctuaries were managed by priests or by local shepherds acting as caretakers. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Greece has always been good at blending holiness with practicality. You sit near the ruins, nibbling a piece of bread left over from the festival. The crust's gone hard enough to qualify as a weapon, but it's food. Technically, you take a sip of water from your flask, now lukewarm and vaguely metallic, and sigh. Divine journeys, it turns out, are rarely glamorous. A faint rumble echoes across the valley. Not thunder, not yet, just the mountain breathing. You lean back, eyes half closed. The sunlight flickers through thin clouds, painting the stones in gold. It's strangely peaceful, this idea of a god who prefers open skies to golden temples. For a fleeting second, you imagine what it would be like to meet Zeus. Not the thunder-hurling caricature, but the local version, the one who smells like pine resin and goat hair, the one who accepts offerings of breadcrumbs and olive oil. You smile at the thought. If the gods were real, they'd probably appreciate someone who just sat quietly and noticed the view. The wind shifts again. You catch the scent of smoke, faint and distant. A village somewhere below must be lighting evening fires. You realize how far you've come, how small everything looks now. When night falls, the stars appear thick and close, scattered across the sky like spilled grain. You lie on your back, The stones cool beneath you. Somewhere, an owl calls. You whisper something to the air. Not quite a prayer, more like a greeting. And for a moment, you swear the wind answers. By the following afternoon, the mountain begins to change. The green thins out completely. Rock replaces soil, and the sound of life fades until it's just you and the wind, your only companion, and not always a polite one. Every so often, you hear faint ringing, metal against stone, echoing somewhere far off. At first, you think it's just imagination. Then, rounding a bend, you find the source. Two men working beside a small shelter of stacked rocks. One's sharpening a blade, the other's heating a bronze bowl over a flickering fire. They glance up, but don't look surprised to see you. Travelers, apparently, are part of the scenery. The older of the two nods. "Pilgrim?" he asks. Same tone as the woman. "Days ago." You nod again. It's becoming a pattern. They invite you to sit. The fire smells of pine resin and iron. The man polishing the bowl explains they're part of a local theasos, a lay brotherhood that tends to shrines and assists priests during festivals. Their job? Keep the altars supplied, maintain the trails, and occasionally guide nervous nobles who want to see where Zeus lives, but not, too closely. Historical fact: many Greek sanctuaries relied on local voluntary associations, not professional clergy. These groups organized rituals, cleaned temples, and managed donations, something between a religious club and a civic committee. In short, the gods had good PR teams. The younger man hands you a cup of warm water mixed with honey. It tastes faintly of smoke, but you're too grateful to care. "Storm coming," he says, glancing up at the clouds rolling down from the summit. Zeus is stirring. You ask what happens during storms up here. He grins. "Mostly we hide." As you sit together, they tell stories, half-remembered myths passed down through generations. How Hera once turned a priest's goats into marble for making too much noise. How Apollo sulked for 7 years after someone mocked his singing. How Hermes once stole his own sandals just to confuse people. You can't tell if they're joking. They probably can't either. An obscure tidbit: during certain mountain rituals, priests would carry torches upward in silence, extinguishing them one by one as the air thinned. The final flame was left burning on a stone altar, a symbol of divine attention, or perhaps divine indifference. Historians still debate the point. One of the men gestures toward a nearby ridge. There's a cave there. People say you can hear the gods whisper if you listen long enough. You look over. The cave is nothing more than a dark split in the rock, its mouth fringed with moss. You file the thought away for later. You help them gather wood and share their bread. The talk drifts between practical matters and quiet philosophy. "You think they're real?" the older man asks suddenly. You shrug. "Maybe once," you say, "or maybe they still are, but smaller now." He chuckles. "Maybe we're the small ones." The storm begins as a faint flicker of light along the ridge, followed by the slow, rolling voice of thunder. The men retreat into their shelter. You follow, crouching under the low stone roof as rain begins to fall, not in sheets, but in heavy, deliberate drops, like the mountain is testing your patience. For a moment, you understand why the ancients treated weather as divine speech. Each thunderclap feels intentional. Each flash illuminates the rocks, like stage lighting in a cosmic play. Inside the shelter, the air grows damp and cold. You huddle close to the fire, its glow soft and uncertain. The older man mutters a short prayer, not in grand Homeric verse, but in the plain rhythm of everyday speech. He thanks Zeus for the rain, for the harvest, for letting them live another year without incident. Then he adds, almost as an afterthought, and for not throwing lightning directly at us, a fair request. The thunder fades eventually. Rain dwindles to a hush. When you step outside, the air is sharp, clean, electric. The ground glistens. Far above, the summit flickers briefly with white light, not lightning this time, but sunlight breaking through the clouds. You stand there for a while, soaked and shivering, and feel a strange calm settle in. Maybe this is what Olympus really is. Not marble halls or immortal banquets, but a place where you remember your own smallness and feel okay with it. The younger man packs up his tools. We'll head down tomorrow, he says. You going higher? You nod. He grins, like he's seen that look before. The mix of curiosity and quiet madness that drives people past the edge of reason. Then may the mountain be gentle with you, he says. You thank them, then watch as they disappear down the trail, their torches bobbing like tiny stars in the gathering dusk. You look up once more at the peak. The clouds are clearing. For the first time, it feels close. Too close, maybe. You breathe deeply, tasting iron and rain. Then you start walking again, one quiet step at a time. You wake to the kind of quiet that feels deliberate. No wind, no birds, not even the distant rattle of sheep bells, just stillness. The mountain's version of a held breath. The fire from last night is long dead. A thin crust of ash covers the coals like a snowdrift. You stretch, bones creaking in the cold, and step outside. The sky is a soft blue-gray, the kind of color that looks undecided about whether to rain again. The air bites gently at your cheeks. The path ahead is barely visible now, more suggestion than road. Each step crunches faintly, the sound swallowed by mist. You think about turning back, then laugh quietly to yourself. You've said that every day since Dion. The mountain always wins. After a long climb, you find the cave the men mentioned, a gash in the rock, framed by ferns and trickling water. The air that seeps out is cool and smells faintly of damp limestone and something older, something metallic and almost sweet. You duck inside. At first, it's too dark to see. Then your eyes adjust, and the shapes emerge. Walls carved smooth by centuries of water, faint etchings along the stone, and a small altar near the back. Someone's left a lamp there, long burned out, but still smelling faintly of olive oil. You light your own. The flame throws shadows across the walls, and for a moment, the flicker looks almost like movement, shapes turning, watching. You remind yourself that imagination has good lungs up here. Your historical anchor? Caves were sacred places in Greek religion, often associated with nymphs, Pan, or even oracles. Before temples rose from marble, worship began underground, where echoes became omens, and dripping water was treated like divine punctuation. An obscure tidbit. The cave, near Olympus, was believed to belong to the Libethrid nymphs, spirits of springs who could bless or bewilder anyone who lingered too long. Ancient travelers left small cups here, hoping for good dreams. You find one on the altar, cracked but intact. It still smells faintly of honey. You sit in the quiet. The cave hums faintly, not sound exactly, but vibration, a low, constant resonance, like the mountain's heartbeat. You close your eyes and listen. Drip, drip, pause. For a moment, you hear something between the drops, a whisper that isn't quite language. It could be your own breath. It could be the echo of the world. Either way, it feels like a secret meant to stay half-heard. Historians still debate whether people actually heard gods in these places or whether the acoustics simply played tricks on them. But you think maybe it doesn't matter. Faith often begins in echoes. You run your hand along the damp stone. It's smooth, almost silky, like the skin of something alive. The lamp flame wavers. You think of all the stories that began like this. A mortal, alone in a cave, seeking a voice from the unseen. Some came out inspired. Some didn't come out at all. The thought makes you smile. At least you're keeping things exciting. In a sleepy kind of way. You whisper into the dark. What was Olympus really like? The cave gives no answer, but the silence that follows feels less empty, like it's thinking. You stay for a long while, letting your breathing slow until the line between thought and place blurs. Then, gently, you rise, leave a small piece of bread on the altar, your humble contribution to divine catering, and step back into daylight. The air outside feels lighter now, as if the mountain has accepted your presence. You take a deep breath and start walking again, your steps slower, more careful. From here, the summit looks close enough to touch. The clouds drift lazily around it, like curtains pulled back for a show that's been running for millennia. You wonder what the gods would think if they knew mortals still climbed here, still asked questions, still whispered to empty caves. Maybe they'd be amused. Maybe they'd roll their eyes. Maybe they'd just listen. The next stretch of the climb feels endless. Each turn looks like the last, each boulder indistinguishable from the next. The mountain has a way of repeating itself, as if testing how long you can stand monotony before calling it sacred. The ground here is pale and dusty, the color of worn marble. When the wind picks up, it carries tiny pebbles that sting your ankles. The air's so thin, you can feel your thoughts slowing down, not unpleasantly, just drowsily. After what feels like hours, you come across another altar, this one newer than the last. It's made of stacked limestone blocks, roughly cut but still sturdy. A cluster of wildflowers grows beside it, yellow and white, stubbornly alive. You sit, grateful for any excuse to rest. Someone's carved a symbol into the stone, a thunderbolt, simple and unmistakable. Beneath it, faint words, to Zeus Uranos, of the open sky. Historical fact: Zeus Uranos was one of the many localized forms of Zeus worshipped across Greece. Unlike the kingly Olympian version, this one was more abstract, a sky god tied to weather, light, and the act of simply looking up. It was less about power and more about perspective. You like that idea, that holiness could just be the discipline of noticing, an obscure tidbit. In some villages, people once performed a ritual before big storms, where they'd throw burning branches into the air, shouting Zeus's name, not as a plea, but as a kind of greeting. It was half theology, half fireworks. You imagine how beautiful that must have looked against the dark sky, little bursts of light saying, "We see you." The wind grows stronger, tugging at your clothes. You wrap your cloak tighter and watch the clouds churn around the peak. It's strange. Up close, Olympus feels less like a mountain and more like an idea pretending to be one. You take out the last of your bread and a small piece of cheese. It's harder than it should be, but you chew anyway. The world feels stripped down to essentials: air, stone, hunger, sky. You think of the people who once stood here before you: shepherds, priests, wanderers, maybe a poet or two who decided enlightenment was only a few more steps uphill. Some probably turned back. Others kept climbing until the clouds swallowed them whole. Historians still debate whether anyone in antiquity ever reached the summit. Some think the idea of climbing that high was too close to hubris, and hubris rarely ended well in Greek stories. You can't blame them. Climbing Olympus to meet Zeus sounds romantic until you realize there's no gift shop at the top. A thin cry cuts through the air. An eagle gliding across the ridge, wings stretched wide. Its feathers flash bronze in the sunlight. You watch it circle once, twice, before disappearing into cloud. There's something undeniably symbolic about that, and you try not to overthink it. You fail immediately. You whisper, half to yourself, "They probably saw you as a sign, didn't they?" The wind answers with a low moan, the kind that feels suspiciously like agreement. The path narrows again. You move slowly now, your body heavy, but your mind strangely calm. The higher you climb, the quieter it gets, as if noise itself can't survive up here. When the next gust of wind clears the mist, you finally see it. The peak, pale stone catching the light, small and distant, yet so close it almost hurts. You pause, not because you're tired, but because you know you'll miss the climb once it's over. The ancient Greeks had a word for that kind of melancholy: kara lipe, joy sadness. They understood that even awe comes with a hint of loss. You think about that as you stand there, the air sharp in your lungs, the world endless below you. Then, somewhere behind you, you hear it. Laughter, faint, distant, echoing through the cliffs. Not cruel, just amused. You spin around, but the trail is empty. Only wind and stone and your heartbeat. You smile. Maybe it's the mountain teasing you, or maybe, just maybe, the old stories aren't done whispering yet. You keep walking, one careful step after another, until the mist swallows you whole. You wake to wind, real wind this time, not the gentle sigh of yesterday, but the kind that insists on being noticed. It howls through the rocks, low and rhythmic, like someone trying to hum in a hurry. The mist has cleared just enough to reveal the jagged ridge ahead, gray against the gray-blue of morning. The path climbs steeply, zigzagging between boulders, the size of small houses. You climb slower now, each step deliberate. Your breath comes in short bursts, and your thoughts stretch thin between them, like thread pulled too tight. You stop to rest by a large flat stone and notice faint markings on its surface, grooves worn smooth, forming a circle. It looks deliberate. Someone once used this place for something. Historical fact: Greek priests performed dawn rituals on the high slopes of Olympus, known as Hierosphoria, the carrying of the dawn. They greeted the sunrise with offerings of bread, oil, and incense, believing the light itself was divine breath. An obscure tidbit: certain versions of the ritual required participants to stay awake all night, watching the sky in silence until the first bird sang. The penalty for falling asleep was, depending on who you asked, divine offense or just mild embarrassment. You can't help but smile. Even the ancients had trouble staying awake for early morning ceremonies. Maybe that's humanity's oldest tradition. You sit cross-legged on the stone and close your eyes. The wind tugs gently at your cloak. Somewhere far below, you can just make out the faint shimmer of the sea, a long, thin line separating blue from blue. You imagine the priests of old sitting here too, clutching their little cups of oil, fighting drowsiness, waiting for that first blush of dawn. Maybe one of them complained about the cold. Maybe another swore he saw a god's shadow and was told he just needed more sleep. Historians still debate whether these rituals were solemn acts of devotion or more of a social event with snacks. Archaeological evidence suggests both. Incense burners have been found beside amphorae of wine. You can almost picture the divine sunrise party. Quiet reverence, light gossip, a few yawns. The first streak of light creeps over the horizon, thin as silk. The rocks blush gold, the mountain exhales. For a moment, it feels as though the world is waking up in slow motion. You whisper something, not a prayer exactly, more like acknowledgement, a simple, "There you are." The air warms slightly, and you notice how even the shadows seem softer now. It's strange, but the higher you climb, the less you think about reaching the top. The summit stops feeling like a goal and starts feeling like a rumor. You remember the cave, the whispers, the woman with her shrine, the laughter that might have been thunder. It all feels connected, like the mountain's been telling one long story, and you're just now catching the rhythm. A thought drifts through you. Maybe Olympus was never about where the gods lived, but how people listened. The wind shifts again, carrying the scent of smoke. Faint, sweet, unmistakable. You follow it. Just beyond a rocky outcrop, you find a small group of stones, arranged in a circle. The ashes in the center are fresh, still warm. Someone's been here not long ago. You run your fingers through the soot. It smells of myrrh, a simple offering left by an unseen pilgrim, or maybe by someone who preferred not to be seen. You add a pebble to the circle, just because it feels right. Then you sit for a while, letting the warmth seep into your hands. The world around you is so still, it feels almost asleep. And maybe, in a way, it is. Maybe everything is resting between breaths. Gods, mountains, and mortals alike. When the sun finally breaks over the horizon, it's quiet and kind. Light spills over the rocks, filling every crevice, every shadow. You watch as the clouds below turn to gold, and you realize the world has flipped. Now the sky lies beneath you. You laugh softly. "Well," you murmur, "guess I made it to heaven." No one mentioned how drafty it is. You stay there until the light becomes too bright to bear. Then stand, stretch, and keep walking. The path ahead bends upward again, vanishing into a sweep of white stone. Somewhere behind you, the wind shifts once more, and for a moment, it sounds almost like applause. By midday, the air feels too thin to belong to Earth. Every breath feels borrowed. The world has narrowed to sky, rock, and the soft scuff of your own steps. The trail rises toward a narrow pass, flanked by two great slabs of stone. They lean inward slightly, forming a kind of natural gate. Someone, long ago, carved faint lines into the rock faces. Not letters, just simple markings. Maybe tallying prayers or years. You touch them as you pass, one finger brushing centuries. On the other side, the wind stops abruptly. You step into silence so complete it feels like a sound of its own. Historical fact: on ancient Olympus, priests and initiates of the local cults believed this upper region was where mortals could meet the breath of the gods, not literally, but spiritually, a place to meditate on the thinness between body and air. It's one of the earliest recorded examples of mountain mysticism, the idea that altitude brings you closer to transcendence. Modern hikers call it view appreciation. The ancients called it the nearness of divinity. You sit down on a rock, catching your breath. The stone is warm from sunlight, smooth as glass. You can see your reflection faintly in it. Ghost-like, flickering, an obscure tidbit. Some ascetic philosophers believed gods didn't live in marble palaces at all, but in the empty air between things. They claimed the divine was Canaan, the vastness. The idea was that stillness itself was holy, which is a poetic way of justifying naps. You lie back, staring at the endless blue above you. The silence here isn't heavy, it's gentle, the kind of silence that listens back. You think about how much effort humans have always spent trying to locate peace, building temples, climbing mountains, inventing myths, and yet, here you are, on a slab of rock halfway to nowhere, and it feels enough. Historians still debate whether Olympus ever truly functioned as a center of organized worship. Archaeological finds suggest scattered altars, but no grand temple, which makes sense, really. The gods of Greece preferred good scenery to good architecture. A breeze drifts through, soft and cool. It carries with it the faint scent of salt. The sea again, impossibly far below. You imagine it shimmering under the same sun that now warms your face. For a second, you feel every part of Greece in one breath. Sea, stone, olive, light. And somewhere inside that stillness, a kind of understanding stirs. Maybe Olympus wasn't a mountain at all. Maybe it was a mirror, showing people what they wanted the sky to mean. You chuckle softly. Congratulations, you tell the wind. You've turned philosophy into altitude sickness. The wind doesn't argue. You rest there for a while, eyes half closed until shadows begin to stretch. The sun slides westward, and the light turns amber. The rocks glow. You feel small in the best possible way. As you prepare to move again, you notice something tucked into a crevice. A small bronze ring, green with age. You pick it up. The metal is cold, etched with what looks like tiny waves. Perhaps an offering, perhaps a lost trinket. Either way, it's now part of your story. You set it gently back where you found it. Down the slope, a hawk cries, clear, cutting through the silence. You watch it vanish into the deepening blue. You whisper, "I'm not here to find you. I'm here to remember you." The mountain doesn't answer, but the air feels warmer as you walk on, and somehow, that's enough. You don't know if the gods ever lived here, but as you climb the last stretch, it's easy to believe they might have once passed by, quietly, barefoot, careful not to wake the world. Night doesn't fall on Olympus so much as it arrives slowly, like a guest who knows they're expected. The air cools, the sky deepens from gold to violet to a blue so dark it feels like silk pressed against your eyes. You sit near a ridge, your little fire flickering against the stones. Its light doesn't reach far, but that's all right. There's something comforting about its smallness. You've spent so long chasing the divine in grandeur. Now, it's hiding in a few glowing embers. Somewhere below, a wolf calls. The sound carries up the slopes and echoes once before fading. Then, silence again. You can almost hear your own pulse. You reach into your pack for what's left of your food. One heel of bread and a few olives that taste faintly of smoke. You chew slowly, eyes on the stars. Historical fact: the ancient Greeks divided the night into 12 parts, called nymphaiora, or hours of the nymphs. They believed each hour was guarded by a spirit responsible for a certain kind of dream or weather. The third hour belonged to gentle breezes, the ninth to prophetic visions. An obscure tidbit: in some mountain regions, shepherds claimed that at midnight the stars whispered, not loudly, just faint murmurs, like someone turning pages. They said it was the sound of fate being rewritten for the next day. You try listening, all you hear is wind, but you appreciate the poetry. The fire crackles softly. You lie back, cloak wrapped around your shoulders, and watch the constellations drift overhead. The Greeks saw gods in these patterns: hunters, swans, bears, heroes frozen mid-triumph. You mostly see bright dots and a few clusters that could pass for spilled salt. Still, it's easy to understand the impulse. When the world below is unpredictable, you start searching for order in the sky. Historians still debate whether common villagers actually knew all these constellations, or if that knowledge belonged mostly to sailors and philosophers. But if you were a shepherd, spending your nights halfway up a mountain, you probably made up your own names anyway. Maybe that cluster there was 3 bored goats. A chill drifts through the rocks. You pull your cloak tighter, then remember the lamp you found in the cave, the one that smelled faintly of honey. You set it beside the fire, light it again. Its flame glows steady, yellow and calm, like a heartbeat. The silence feels friendly now, not empty, just resting. You realize how long it's been since you heard another human voice. You think of the woman in the hut, the 2 men with their fire, the old man in Dion. They've all become part of the mountain's chorus now, faint, remembered voices carried on wind. For a moment, you almost envy the gods, not for their power, but for their patience. Immortality sounds exhausting, but the ability to simply sit and watch centuries unfold, that's tempting. You stretch out by the fire, half smiling. If anyone's up there, you murmur, "Good evening. Sorry for trespassing. I brought snacks. No thunder, no lightning, just a soft breeze." You decide to take that as acceptance. The stars sharpen as the air cools further. They seem impossibly bright, like small thoughts of light puncturing the fabric of the sky. You trace one moving across the horizon, slow and silent. Maybe it's a god on patrol. Maybe it's just a piece of stone falling elegantly. Either way, it's beautiful. Sleep begins to pull at you, gentle as the tide. Your thoughts slow. The fire dims. The lamp flickers once, then steadies. You whisper to yourself, half dreaming, maybe heaven's just a quiet place where nothing needs explaining. And with that, the mountain folds you into its dark and dreamless calm. You wake before dawn, unsure whether it's the cold or the silence that roused you. The stars have faded to a faint shimmer, and the world feels paused between inhale and exhale. The fire's long gone. You rub your hands together and blow warmth into them. The stones around you sparkle faintly with frost. A rare sight on this mountain, but somehow fitting. Even Olympus gets sleepy. You pack up your things, tie your cloak, and start walking again. The path curves upward toward what looks like a wide plateau. The horizon begins to glow, thin, silver, hesitant. As you climb, you hear it, a faint rhythm echoing through the still air. Drums, maybe, or feet. You follow the sound until the trail opens into a flat clearing surrounded by crumbled stones. At its center, a small group of people, half a dozen figures, wrapped in dark cloaks, stand around a low altar. One of them raises a torch, its light trembling in the wind. They chant softly, the words lost to distance, but the melody simple, repetitive, soothing. You stay at the edge, watching. The flames cast long shadows on the ground, and their voices rise and fall in gentle waves. It's not a grand ceremony, more like a lullaby for the mountain. Historical fact, on the slopes of Olympus, seasonal rituals called noctuli, night observances, were held during equinoxes. Participants offered wine and grain to the gods of the air and sky, marking the shift between light and dark. An obscure tidbit. In some accounts, worshippers sang in alternating whispers so as not to wake the gods too abruptly. The belief was that dawn itself was divine sleep lifting. You suppose that makes you a dawn alarm, though less melodic. You crouch, still watching, as one of the figures pours a libation, wine spilling onto stone, dark and fragrant. Another scatters barley. Then, as quickly as it began, the chanting fades. They bow, extinguish their torches, and vanish down a side path without a word. For a long time, you sit there, unsure whether you've witnessed something sacred or just very well organized superstition. Historians still debate the nature of these noctuli. Some call them private cults, others seasonal community rites, but none can quite explain why so many versions involve whispering. Maybe reverence just sounds quieter at altitude. When the sun finally breaks, it happens fast. A single blade of light slicing the horizon. The plateau turns gold. The rocks gleam like old bronze. And suddenly, everything feels awake again. You walk toward the altar. The offerings are still there. Wine drying on stone, a few scattered grains, a single fig cut neatly in half. You touch the surface, still damp with dew. The smell of the wine lingers faintly in the air. Sweet, sharp, faintly earthy. You pour the last of your water beside it. Not an offering, exactly. More like a thank you note to the morning. Then you look around. The view stretches endlessly. Ridges rolling down to forests. Rivers threading like silver veins through the valleys. The sea glittering in the far distance. Everything you've passed. Villages, shrines, caves, now lies somewhere below that golden haze. And for the first time, the summit no longer feels like a mystery. It feels like an afterthought. The climb itself has become the story. You sit quietly, breathing in the thin air. The mountain hums faintly under your palms. You imagine the gods stirring somewhere above, lazy and content, deciding whether to rise. You think, maybe Olympus was never about divinity in the clouds. Maybe it was always about humans, learning to find reverence in the cold air and cracked stone. The thought makes you smile. You stand, stretch, and whisper, "Sleep well, old gods. We've got it from here." The breeze stirs, warm now, carrying the scent of time and sunlight. You start walking again, heading toward the light. Morning on the mountain comes not as a burst, but as a sigh. The sun creeps slowly down the rocks, laying soft gold across every crack and ridge. The air smells faintly of thyme and damp stone, and somewhere below, a shepherd's flute drifts upward. Faint, almost apologetic, you stretch, feeling the ache in your legs. You've climbed through night and dream, and somehow you're still here. The thought itself feels faintly divine. The summit is only a short climb ahead now, but for the first time, you hesitate. The mountain seems to be whispering, slow down. After all, the gods you're about to meet are in no hurry. Immortality doesn't really encourage punctuality. You climb anyway, slowly, savoring the quiet. The path narrows between two jagged ridges before flattening out into a small plateau ringed by weathered stones. The view is absurd. A sea of clouds below, like thick white wool, stretching to every horizon. You exhale, then laugh softly. Well, you say, I guess this is it. Welcome to Olympus. Please watch your step. There's no temple, no gleaming marble, just open sky, and an ancient sense that something happened here once. Something that still lingers in the bones of the rock. Historical fact: the ancient Greeks imagined Mount Olympus not as a physical palace, but as a divine court floating above the clouds. Homer described it as the ever-bright home, where storms never gathered and day never ended. Scholars now think that Olympus was more of a metaphor, the idea of perpetual clarity, an obscure tidbit. In a few old hymns, Olympus had domestic staff. Spirits of wind and dew were said to sweep the floors, and invisible horses carried divine gossip between rooms. The idea that gods had weather-shaped servants feels oddly bureaucratic, like a celestial HR department. You sit on a flat stone and let your imagination fill in the blanks. You picture Hera polishing her crown, Zeus half listening to yet another prayer request, Athena organizing scrolls no one asked for, Apollo tuning his lyre for the 17th time that morning. It's oddly comforting to imagine them not as thunder-throwing archetypes, but as co-workers who can't quite agree on who's in charge of lunch. Historians still debate whether the Greek gods were ever meant to be taken literally, or if they were personifications of natural forces. The answer is probably yes. Humans have always turned the weather into characters. It's easier to negotiate with rain if you can picture its face. You close your eyes and listen. The wind shifts, gentle, circling, curious. For a moment, you could swear you hear voices in it. Not speech exactly, but the faint murmur of something alive and amused. You imagine them watching you, a mortal climbing up with breadcrumbs and curiosity, asking what Olympus was actually like. You imagine them smiling, exchanging a look, whispering, still asking, and maybe they are. You stand, brush the dust from your cloak, and take a slow walk across the plateau. Every step feels deliberate, quiet, as if you're walking through someone's memory. At the edge, you find a smooth stone the size of a chair and sit. The sun's warmth sinks into your bones. You close your eyes, breathing deeply. Somewhere in the distance, thunder grumbles, soft, domestic, like a door closing upstairs. Good morning to you too, you whisper. You open your eyes, smile faintly, and feel, for the first time, that you're not just climbing toward the gods, you're sharing their morning. By mid-morning, the light has turned syrupy, thick and golden, pouring across the stones. The air feels lighter now, thinner, but sweeter, like something has unclenched. You wander across the plateau, tracing faint lines carved into the rock, circles, spirals, maybe old boundary marks, or game boards. Some ancient worshiper probably spent hours here, waiting for divine revelation, and ended up inventing tic-tac-toe. Nearby, a cluster of small stones forms a kind of seat. You sit down, take out your water skin, and sip. The water tastes faintly of bronze, like it's aged in the company of myths. Historical fact: ancient Greek poets described Olympus as having distinct halls for each god, though these weren't architectural spaces, more like symbolic domains. Zeus's hall was thunder, Athena's was air, Aphrodite's was the shimmer on water. Each god's essence was their home, an obscure tidbit. According to a rarely cited Orphic fragment, the gods held something like assembly hours every 10 days, not to govern mortals, but to gossip about them. One line even mentions Zeus laughing so hard he spilled his nectar. You can't help but picture Olympus as one long divine coffee break. You glance up at the clouds curling below and try to imagine what those meetings would sound like. Probably a lot of polite chaos. You picture Hera sighing, "We should really do something about all those sacrifices piling up." Hermes replies, "I filed them alphabetically." Zeus adds, "You mean alphabetically according to mood, right?" Even at their most powerful, the gods the Greeks imagined were never fully untouchable. They quarreled, loved, plotted, sulked. All very human verbs. Maybe that's why people found comfort in them. The gods were perfect mirrors for imperfection. Historians still debate whether this anthropomorphism was satire or sincerity. Were the myths devotional, or were they just ancient reality shows with better costumes? The truth, as usual, hides somewhere in between. A breeze sweeps over the stones, carrying the scent of sage and sun-warmed dust. You lean back, eyes half closed, and let your mind wander. The light flickers on your eyelids. Like moving water, you imagine a goddess brushing her hair by a mirror made of cloud. A god practicing his thunder voice in the corner. Someone tripping over a celestial cat. You laugh softly. If heaven's real, it must be endlessly awkward. The sound echoes gently. Even the mountain seems to find that fair. You take a slow breath. The world below stretches endless and blue, dotted with the faint white of distant villages. You think of all the people waking up down there, lighting fires, arguing over bread prices, humming as they wash. You wonder if, for them, Olympus feels distant or protective. Maybe that's what the mountain really was. Not a home for gods, but a reflection of hope itself. A promise that somewhere above the storms, someone was keeping watch. The thought feels steady, grounding. You close your eyes again, letting it settle. The wind hums through the stones, low and melodic. It sounds faintly like laughter again. That same amused tone you heard days ago on the slopes. You smile. "All right," you whisper. "I get it. You were never that far away." You stay there for a long while, listening to the hum of the air and the far-off rustle of clouds, until the morning folds softly into afternoon. The sun warms your face. The stones glow faintly underfoot. Somewhere, unseen, Olympus goes on. its quiet conversations blending into the breath of the world. By early afternoon, the mountain hums in sunlight. Everything looks bleached and still, as if Olympus has decided to nap. The stones shimmer faintly in the heat. Even the wind seems to have gone for a break. You walk without direction now. The trail has dissolved into openness. Just pale rock and sky. It's not hard to imagine this was what the ancients meant by divine ground. A place so empty, it begins to feel full again. Your shadow stretches long and thin across the stone. It looks like someone following you at a polite distance. You don't mind. Solitude is easier when it looks companionable. You pause beside a small hollow in the rock, maybe once a basin or altar. Inside it, a few dried flower stems cling to the dust. Modern, probably left by some other climber who couldn't resist making a small gesture of reverence. Humans are hopelessly predictable that way. Historical fact: on the lower slopes of Olympus, ancient pilgrims once maintained dozens of small roadside shrines called herms. These were simple stone pillars, topped with a carved head, usually Hermes, protector of travelers and jokes. People left pebbles, honey, and sometimes tiny bronze sandals, symbolic of safe journeys. An obscure tidbit: some of these herms were reportedly so covered in offerings that travelers used them as impromptu markets. You could pick up spare rope, oil, or even a snack left behind by an overly generous worshiper. The first divine convenience stores. You glance around and picture one of those little shrines here. Stones stacked neatly, maybe a small carved face grinning at you through the centuries. Hermes, watching the eternal traffic of mortals. You offer a quiet thank you to the air. Not sure for what exactly. Maybe for the road itself. Historians still debate whether Olympus was actively tended by priests or just symbolically sacred. Archaeological layers suggest long gaps between use, as if the mountain was alternately revered and ignored depending on who ruled below. It's oddly comforting to think even holiness has off-seasons. You sit by the hollow and rest your back against the warm stone. The light feels soft now, diffused through the thin mountain air. Everything glows in slow motion. A bee drifts past, impossibly high for such a small creature. You wonder what it's doing up here. Maybe even insects make pilgrimages, or maybe it's lost and too polite to admit it. The mountain stays utterly quiet, except for the faint, distant hiss of wind moving through ridges below. The silence isn't heavy. It's the kind that invites your thoughts to wander. You think about all the people who've stood here through the ages, each convinced they were the first to feel this calm. You imagine them leaving small things behind: a coin, a song, a piece of bread, a whispered question. Maybe all those offerings have layered invisibly into the air, and that's what gives Olympus its strange, watchful peace. You close your eyes. The sunlight brushes your face like a hand made of gold dust. The breeze picks up just slightly, almost approving. Somewhere far below, thunder rumbles, gentle, restrained, as if to remind you that Zeus hasn't retired entirely. You smile. All right, you murmur. Message received. The air smells faintly of sage and smoke. The afternoon drifts onward, and the world feels wider, older, kinder. If holiness could nap, it would look like this. By late afternoon, the color of the sky begins to change again. Not toward dusk yet, but into that in-between shade that looks like faded copper. The sun slides lower and shadows lengthen into soft geometry across the rock. You follow the slope down toward a shallow ridge and find, to your surprise, a low stone wall. It's crumbled and scattered, but its shape is deliberate. A rectangle, perhaps once an enclosure, a sanctuary. The ground inside is smooth, swept by centuries of wind. You step in carefully. Historical fact: archaeologists have uncovered traces of a modest sanctuary on the lower terraces of Olympus, probably dating to the 4th century BCE. It wasn't a grand temple, but a humble gathering space, perhaps for shepherds or local pilgrims. Offerings there included clay figurines, shells, and burned olive pits, suggesting quiet domestic devotion rather than imperial religion. An obscure tidbit: one clay tablet found nearby contains what might be the world's earliest complaint about temple noise. The writer scrawled, "The priest talks too loud at dawn." An eternal problem. You smile at the thought of someone grumbling their way through holiness. It's endearing, really. Faith and frustration, inseparable since forever. You kneel beside one of the stones. Lichen grows across it in mottled greens and golds, like old script trying to rewrite itself. You run your fingers across the rough surface and feel faint grooves, perhaps letters, long eroded. Whatever prayer they once carried has been folded back into silence. Historians still debate what god this sanctuary was for. Some say Zeus, others Hera, or maybe just a nameless spirit of the mountain. The absence of certainty feels right. Olympus doesn't like being labeled. You stand and look out over the valley. The light hits the rock in long slanted waves, and for a moment, the whole mountain seems to glow. You can see tiny flashes below, maybe sunlight glinting off the roofs of the villages, or maybe the shimmer of some ancient river still deciding which century it's in. You think about how people once believed the gods could see everything from up here. It's an appealing thought, not of being judged, but of being noticed. Maybe that's what all prayers boil down to, the simple hope that someone's listening. You sit on the fallen wall, hands on your knees, and let your thoughts drift. The air is cooling now, and a faint chill creeps into the shadows. Somewhere nearby, you hear the faint sound of water trickling, a spring hidden among the rocks. You find it a few minutes later, a small stream spilling through stone, clear and cold. You cup your hands and drink. The water tastes like metal and snow. You imagine the countless hands that have done the same, all folded into this single act. You lean back and close your eyes. The sound of the spring is steady, hypnotic. You could stay here for hours, maybe forever. The mountain feels timeless in this light, ancient but awake, endlessly patient. You imagine the gods drifting by invisibly, yawning, stretching, exchanging half-hearted updates about humanity. You smile. Still here, you whisper to them. Still climbing. The breeze answers with a sigh that sounds almost like laughter. The sun slips lower. The shadows lengthen. You pull your cloak around you and sit by the spring until the first stars begin to tremble faintly above the ridges. It feels like the world is blinking slowly, getting ready to dream again. Twilight stretches across Olympus, like ink diluted in water, slow even, unhurried. The color drains from the world, leaving only cool silver and shadow. Every sound becomes softer, the clink of a pebble, the faint sweep of air, the steady rhythm of your own breath. You walk along the ridge, your steps barely disturbing the dust. Each stone seems to glow faintly, reflecting the last threads of sunlight from somewhere far below. You think about how many sunsets this mountain has seen, so many that even eternity must get déjà vu. The air carries a faint metallic chill. You pull your cloak tighter and glance toward the horizon. The sea is gone now, replaced by a vast expanse of gray-blue haze. It's hard to tell where the world ends and the sky begins. Historical fact: ancient Greek travelers believed twilight was when boundaries blurred, not just between night and day, but between worlds. It was the hour when gods, spirits, and mortals could briefly cross paths. Philosophers even had a term for it: hemichronos, the halftime. An obscure tidbit: on Olympus's lower slopes, shepherds used to hang bronze bells on poles at dusk, believing the soft ringing would remind the air who it belonged to. A kind of nightly roll call for the living. You pause on a ledge and imagine that sound. 100 faint chimes swaying in the wind, marking the shift between the seen and the unseen. The idea feels oddly comforting. Maybe that's what faith is. A way to make sure the air doesn't forget you. The path curves downward, and you find a small rock shelter, shallow, half collapsed, but offering a break from the wind. You crawl inside, light your small lamp, and watch the flame struggle to steady itself. The walls glint faintly in the dim light, streaked with mineral veins, like frozen lightning. You sit with your back against the stone, lamp beside you, knees drawn close. The air is thin enough now that each breath feels like a choice. Historians still debate whether hermits or early philosophers ever lived permanently on Olympus. Some fragments suggest there were watchers of the sky who spent years observing stars and weather patterns, recording what they saw on clay tablets later lost to erosion. You like to imagine them here, huddled under the same ledge, half priest, half scientist, keeping vigil for the heavens. You take out a small scrap of bread, the last of your food, and eat slowly. It's hard and dry, but you don't mind. Hunger feels trivial compared to the quiet weight of the mountain around you. The lamp flickers, then steadies. Its glow softens the cave's edges. The shadows no longer look sharp or threatening, just thoughtful. You start to feel that peculiar peace that comes after a long journey, when there's nowhere left to climb and nothing left to prove. Outside, the wind hums low. You imagine it carrying the voices of the watchers, murmured prayers, or maybe just weather reports disguised as poetry. You smile to yourself. Still watching, you whisper. Still listening. The lamp burns lower, then out. The darkness isn't frightening. It's full, quiet, and patient, like an answer that doesn't need words. You lie back against the stone, the faint scent of smoke and dust around you. Your thoughts drift gently toward the edge of sleep. The last thing you hear is the wind slipping through the cave mouth, a slow, deliberate breath, as if the mountain itself is dreaming. You wake to moonlight, not the silvery, storybook kind. This is sharper, almost blue, slicing cleanly across the rocks, like cold glass. The air feels thinner than ever, but so clear it almost rings. You step out of the cave and pause. The world looks transformed. Clouds hang below you, like an ocean frozen midwave. The peaks around you, rising like islands from mist. The stars above are so bright, they seem carved. For a moment, You forget to move. You just stand there, suspended between sky and sea of cloud, unsure which one you belong to. Historical fact: Greek astronomers once claimed that Olympus was the best place in the world to hear the stars. The idea wasn't poetic. They genuinely believed celestial bodies made sound, faint but constant, forming what philosophers later called the music of the spheres. An obscure tidbit: a few surviving texts describe monks of later centuries climbing the mountain, not to pray, but to listen for the hum of the firmament. Some brought bronze bowls, convinced that if they struck them at midnight, the bowls would resonate with starlight. You imagine how lovely that must have sounded. A quiet, metallic ringing in the cold dark, like a duet between earth and sky. You take a slow breath and listen. At first, all you hear is silence. Then, faintly, something hums. Not sound exactly, but vibration. A frequency so soft, it might be your pulse, or it might be everything's pulse. You laugh quietly. Either I've found cosmic harmony, you whisper, or I need lunch. The echo returns your voice slightly altered, as if the mountain's trying out your humor. You start walking again, guided by the moonlight. The trail glows faintly, a silver ribbon curling through stone. Each step feels softer now, easier, as if the mountain's gravity has relaxed its grip. You find another flat space ahead, small and perfectly circular, surrounded by short stone pillars. A ruined observatory, maybe, or a ritual site. It's hard to tell where science ended and worship began up here. Maybe they were always the same thing. You sit on one of the stones and tilt your head back. The stars don't twinkle from here. They blaze. Each one feels close enough to touch. Historians still debate how much of ancient astronomy was observation versus imagination. But maybe that distinction doesn't matter. Looking up has always been an act of faith, whether you expect math or miracles in return. The moon slides higher, and the light changes subtly. The stones gleam like bone. Your breath fogs, faintly, curling upward, joining the air. For the first time, you feel completely weightless, not floating exactly, but unstuck, like your thoughts have forgotten where they end. You imagine the watchers again, cloaked, patient, staring at the sky until dawn. Maybe they never took notes, because what they saw couldn't be written. Maybe they were listening to what silence sounds like when it's full. You close your eyes and sit very still. The mountain hums beneath you, and above, the stars flicker softly, as if winking back. It's the quietest moment yet. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. You whisper into the air. You were right. It's beautiful up here. A breeze moves past. Not cold, not warm, just present. You open your eyes again, smiling faintly. The clouds below shift, revealing the faintest glint of dawn on the horizon. The mountain is breathing, and for once, you're breathing with it. The first sign of dawn isn't light, but color. A thin stripe of rose blushes across the horizon, trembling where sky meets cloud. The stars fade, reluctantly, one by one, like guests at a party realizing it's time to leave. The air feels different now. Still cold, but softer, almost forgiving. You've survived the mountain's long night, and that feels quietly heroic. Even if your only weapon was stubbornness, you stand and stretch. Your cloak smells faintly of smoke and stone. The moon hangs pale behind you, already retreating. Historical fact. In ancient Greek thought, dawn wasn't just a time of day, it was a goddess, Eos, who renewed the world by washing it in her light. Her arrival was both myth and meteorology, the cosmic equivalent of turning the page. An obscure tidbit. Some rural Greeks once left bowls of water outside overnight for Eos to bathe in. In the morning, they'd sprinkle the dew on their faces for good fortune. You briefly consider trying that, but your nearest bowl is a dented canteen, and the only fortune you're after is a nap. The sky deepens from pink to gold, and the ridge beneath your feet glows like marble come alive. The air shivers with new warmth. You start walking again, following the faintest hint of trail downward. The stones are slick with dew, and the light catches them like small fires. You move slowly, careful, reverent. The mountain feels quieter now, not empty, just content. It's as if Olympus itself is exhaling. Its long vigil over. Halfway down, you find something unexpected. A row of small stones arranged deliberately in a curve. Between them, faint lines carved into the rock. Circles, crosshatches. What might be ancient symbols? Or maybe just decorative wandering. You crouch, tracing one with your finger. Your touch stirs a puff of dust. Beneath it, a simple carving emerges. A spiral, smooth and precise. Historians still debate what these mountain markings mean. Some say they were boundary markers, others star maps, or personal prayers scratched into stone by pilgrims who couldn't afford marble. Whatever the truth, they feel strangely intimate, like graffiti from eternity. You stand, brushing your hands. The spiral stays with you. It feels like a message, though from who or to whom is anyone's guess. You pause and look around. The light is changing fast now. Each moment, a new painting. The clouds below are gilded, the air alive. You can smell earth again. Real soil. Distant pine. You whisper softly, "Thank you," and mean it. Then you start down again, one careful step at a time. The wind rises behind you, just enough to sound like laughter. Faint, approving, old. You don't turn around. You know the gods are busy pretending not to watch. You walk until your legs burn, until the air thickens and the world below starts to look familiar again. Human, cluttered, ordinary. Somewhere up above, Olympus begins to fade into the morning haze. And you can't help but think, maybe the gods never left. Maybe they just learned to whisper through sunlight instead of thunder. The next morning dawns clear and bright, the kind of blue that only comes after months of gray. The sunlight hits the rocks in wide, gentle bands, and for the first time, in what feels like forever, warmth settles on your skin instead of wind. You stop and look back. Olympus rises behind you, a vast sweep of pale stone floating in haze. It's strange. From this angle, it doesn't look unreachable. It looks like something you might have dreamed. You take a deep breath. The air down here smells different, full of life again. Wild thyme, soil, a hint of smoke from some unseen village below. The human world, busy as ever, just waking up. Historical fact. Pilgrims descending Olympus often brought back small stones as tokens of divine proximity. Some were kept as charms, others ground into dust and mixed with oil for mountain salves, a kind of ancient wellness trend. An obscure tidbit. In a few rare texts, those same pilgrims wrote that after returning home, They sometimes heard the mountain in their sleep, faint wind sounds, distant laughter, or the hum of stars. They called it the memory of air. You crouch and pick up a smooth pebble, pale and oval. It fits perfectly in your palm. You rub your thumb over its surface until it warms, then tuck it into your pocket, a little proof that the silence was real. The path widens now, lined with low bushes and early flowers. Bees drift lazily among them, unbothered by divinity. You follow the trail, and soon the first sounds of civilization reach your ears. A goat's bleat, the soft ring of a bell, a dog barking in the distance. You smile. The noises are grounding, reminders that the world is still ordinary, which somehow feels miraculous. You pause by a large flat rock and sit, watching the valley below. It stretches endlessly, green and silver, rivers glinting through the haze. You can see the faint outline of the road to Dion, and beyond that, the shimmer of the sea. You think of everyone you met along the way, the shepherd, the woman in the hut, the voices that may or may not have been real. They all feel part of the same quiet story now, like verses in a hymn. Historians still debate what the ancients truly believed about Olympus, whether they saw it as heaven, metaphor, or just a really tall mountain. But maybe that uncertainty is the point. The mystery gives it life. You lie back on the rock, hands behind your head, and close your eyes. The sun warms your face, and for the first time, you feel both heavy and light, as if gravity itself has agreed to loosen its hold for a while. You whisper, maybe holiness is just being here long enough to notice. A breeze moves gently through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and faraway rain. The sound is soft, steady, endless. You don't open your eyes. You don't need to. The mountain hums somewhere behind you, low and content, and the sky above glows with that familiar golden clarity the Greeks once called Olympian light. And though you're far below it now, you realize you never really left. By midday, you've reached the tree line again. The mountain's thin silence fades into a different kind of quiet, the kind filled with insects and leaves and the slow creak of branches in wind. You didn't realize how much you'd missed that kind of noise. The air is warmer here, dense with the smell of pine sap and wild mint. You stop beside a trickling stream, crouch and splash cold water onto your face. It's shockingly alive. You look back. The summit is barely visible now, half swallowed by cloud. It already feels impossible. A story you could almost convince yourself you made up. Historical fact. Pilgrims who descended from Olympus often stopped at forest shrines dedicated to Pan, the god of wild places and half-finished thoughts. These weren't grand sanctuaries, but mossy clearings with wooden idols and small fires that smelled faintly of goat hair and honey. An obscure tidbit. Offerings to Pan sometimes included milk poured directly into the earth. The practice was said to feed the silence, a poetic way of saying thank you to the woods for putting up with humanity. You find yourself smiling. You can almost imagine it. People stumbling down the mountain, exhausted and reverent, muttering their gratitude to the dirt itself. The trail widens, curving through thick trees. The sunlight here is gentler, dappled. Birds chatter invisibly overhead. Busy, unphilosophical creatures, with no patience for divine revelation. You follow the sound of bells and find a small clearing. In the center, an ancient stump carved with faint human shapes. One head, two goat legs, and what might be an instrument. You laugh softly. Found you, Pan. You sit beside the stump and pull out your pebble from earlier. You set it down carefully on the carved wood, unsure why. Maybe to complete the circle. Maybe because the act feels kind. Historians still debate whether Pan was ever worshipped formally on Olympus's slopes. Some say his shrines were tolerated, not celebrated. A rural god visiting the high god's doorstep. Others think he never cared about boundaries. You like the second version better. You rest your elbows on your knees, watching ants march in neat lines across the roots. There's something deeply reassuring about their focus. No myth, no meaning, just doing their job. The wind stirs through the trees. A low whisper that sounds suspiciously like laughter again. You grin. I see you're still following me, you say. The trees don't answer, but a single pine cone drops nearby, landing with perfect comic timing. You laugh out loud this time. The mountain may not speak, but it clearly enjoys the conversation. The sun shifts, sliding lower through the branches. The air smells green, ancient, endless. You realize that Olympus has changed nothing and everything at once. You're still a person, on a path, hungry, tired, curious. But now there's something lighter in you, like your thoughts have been aired out. You take one last sip from the stream and start walking again. The sound of the forest wrapping around you, like music that doesn't need melody. The mountain hums faintly behind you, steady and eternal, while below, the world waits patiently to resume being ordinary. By late afternoon, you reach the valley floor, a wide sweep of green threaded with silver rivers and dotted with olive trees. The first houses appear, low stone walls, red-tiled roofs, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. Civilization, with all its small, noisy miracles. You walk into the nearest village, just as the light turns honey-colored. The streets are narrow, unpaved, and lined with wooden carts and sleepy dogs. A few villagers glance up as you pass, then return to whatever they were doing. You must look like a ghost from a mountain legend. Dusty cloak, weathered face, eyes still full of clouds. The scent of bread drifts through the air. You follow it to a small courtyard where an elderly woman pulls loaves from a clay oven. The smell alone could redeem humanity. Historical fact. In ancient times, villages near Olympus hosted small, return feasts for pilgrims. Anyone coming down from the mountain was treated as slightly blessed or slightly insane and was fed until they stopped speaking in riddles. An obscure tidbit. One local tradition claimed that bread baked with mountain spring water would never mold, for the gods dislike decay. Later tests have disproved this, but the sentiment is charmingly optimistic. You greet the woman softly in her dialect, and she nods. Without a word, she hands you a piece of bread. Still warm, crust crackling. You thank her, and she waves you off with that universal motion, meaning you clearly need this more than I do. You sit on a low wall and eat slowly. The bread tastes like sunlight and ash. It's the best thing you've ever had. Though hunger always improves theology, the village hums with quiet life. A man mends fishing nets in the corner. A child chases a chicken. Somewhere, a lute plays, off-key but sincere. You take a long breath and let it all in. Historians still debate whether ancient pilgrims shared their Olympus experiences or kept them secret. Some inscriptions suggest a vow of silence. Others read more like travel blogs, carved into stone. Maybe the truth was both. People told their stories in whispers, afraid to break whatever peace they'd found. You finish the bread and watch the sunset turn the fields gold. For the first time in days, you feel entirely human again. The divine air has been replaced by the smell of smoke and olives, and it's perfect. You reach into your pocket and touch the small pebble again. It's still warm, though you're not sure if that's from your hand or from the memory of the mountain. You roll it between your fingers and smile. Still here, you whisper. A group of villagers walks by, laughing about something you don't catch. One of them looks at you, curious. You coming from up there? He asks, pointing to the mountain. You nod. He grins. Did you see them? You think for a long moment before answering. Not exactly, you say, but I think they saw me. He laughs, shakes his head, and moves on. The sun slips behind the ridges, leaving a wash of pink in the air. The first stars appear, faint and flickering, and the village lights begin to glow one by one. You sit there until the sky deepens, the mountain fading into silhouette, and realize that every journey upward is really just a slow return home. Night returns gently, like an afterthought. The mountain behind you fades into silhouette, and the valley hums with small, human noises, a dog barking, a pot clinking, a quiet conversation carried through an open window. The air smells of smoke and olive oil. You find a bench near the square, sit down, and watch the evening unroll. A few children chase each other through the dust. Their laughter echoes faintly, bouncing off the stone walls. Somewhere, someone's singing a song without any particular tune. It's all so wonderfully, perfectly unremarkable. Historical fact: many Greek villages kept local traditions, linking their daily routines to Olympus. Lighting the hearth fire each night was said to mirror Hestia's eternal flame, and pouring out a little wine before drinking was a nod to Dionysus, a gesture older than written history itself. An obscure tidbit: in some regions, people refused to whistle after sunset, believing it might summon Hermes, more mischievous spirits, the kind who misplaced tools or turned sheep in the wrong direction. Superstition, of course, but charmingly practical. You sit there for a long while, letting the rhythm of the village slow your thoughts. Every motion seems deliberate. Bread sliced, water poured, hands brushing crumbs from a table. It's as though everyone here knows how to move gently in their own world. A small boy walks past carrying a loaf wrapped in cloth. He glances at you, squints, and says, "You came from the mountain, didn't you?" You nod. He considers this seriously. "Did you see Zeus?" You smile. "I saw a lot of clouds." He laughs, satisfied, and runs off toward a house where light spills through an open door. Historians still debate how much the ancient Greeks believed in the literal presence of their gods, but watching the way people live here, the quiet gestures, the reverent ordinary, you think maybe belief was never about proof. Maybe it was about participation. The baker from earlier steps outside to cool a new batch of bread. The smell drifts across the square like a blessing. You can't help but grin. It's no lightning bolt, but it'll do. You stretch your legs and look up. The stars are sharper here than in the city, but gentler than on the mountain. They seem closer, friendlier, like they've followed you down to make sure you got home safely. You whisper to them, "Thanks for keeping me company." The stars don't answer, but a soft breeze moves through the square, and for a moment, the olive trees sway just enough to sound like applause. You lean back against the bench, breathing in the smell of smoke and night air, and realize this is what holiness must look like when it's comfortable, not grand or blinding, just warm, patient, familiar. You close your eyes. The mountain hum still lingers faintly somewhere in your chest. But now it sounds like laughter. You wake before dawn to the sound of a rooster. Loud, insistent, terribly confident. The world is still gray, the air cool, and the smell of wood smoke curls lazily through the streets. The baker's oven glows faintly again, and you can hear the rhythmic sound of kneading. Soft, steady, meditative. You walk toward the sound and see the old woman from yesterday. She nods at you, then gestures to the bench by her door. You sit without protest. She works in silence, her hands moving with a kind of grace that comes only from repetition. You watch, fascinated, as she shapes the dough and slides it into the fire. Historical fact: in ancient Greece, bread making was considered both a daily necessity and a sacred act. The goddess Demeter was said to watch over every grain, and bakers often whispered short prayers before touching the dough. Some loaves were even marked with simple sun symbols, not decoration, but invocation. An obscure tidbit: archaeologists once found a loaf of bread in Pompeii with a faint inscription that translates loosely to, "I hope this one doesn't burn." Proof that divine humor and human impatience have always shared the same kitchen. The baker glances at you and asks softly, "Did you find what you were looking for up there?" You think for a long moment. "I'm not sure," you say. "Maybe it wasn't up there." She nods knowingly, as if she's heard that before. You sip the water she offers, cold, slightly metallic, like the streams of Olympus. The taste brings a strange comfort, as though the mountain has quietly followed you home. When the bread is ready, she breaks off a small piece and hands it to you. It's warm, fragrant, and perfect. You take a bite and laugh softly. "I think I found something better than lightning bolts," you say. She smiles. "Bread will do that." Outside, the sky begins to brighten. A faint pink line appears over the ridge, and roosters answer each other from distant fields. The village stirs awake, slow and reluctant. You walk to the edge of the square, bread still in hand, and look up. Olympus stands clear in the morning light, sharp, still, indifferent, but somehow it feels gentler now, as if it recognizes you. Historians still debate whether Olympus was ever meant to be climbed, or if that was purely a mortal impulse. The need to reach the unreachable, to stand where stories begin. Maybe the mountain was always less a destination and more a mirror. You take another bite of bread, still warm from the fire. The taste is earthy, sweet, alive. You think, maybe holiness lives in whatever we repeat with care. You turn back toward the square. The day is beginning. The simple miracle of it: smoke rising, water boiling, sunlight catching on stone. The gods, if they're watching, must be smiling. Or maybe they're still asleep, dreaming of bread and quiet mornings. Either way, the world feels blessed enough. By mid-morning, the village is fully awake. The square hums softly with the slow rhythm of chores. Buckets clinking at the well, a broom brushing dust, someone hammering at a loose shutter. Life resumes its small, necessary music. You wander through the narrow lanes. The walls are pale, cracked, and sun-warmed, draped with vines and laundry that flutter like flags of surrender to the wind. Children run past, laughing, chasing a hoop down the slope. The smell of baking and olives follows you everywhere, as if the whole town runs on bread and myth. Historical fact: in villages near Olympus, local artisans often claimed their crafts were gifts from specific gods. Potters credited Athena for their precision, blacksmiths swore by Hephaestus's guidance, and weavers whispered small prayers to the fates before cutting thread. Just in case, an obscure tidbit, one account from a 2nd century traveler mentions a tailor who kept a small altar in his shop to appease the needle spirits. Historians aren't sure if he meant literal spirits or just the ones that made him prick his thumb less often. You stop by a potter's stall where a man shapes clay with slow, sure hands. His wheel hums softly, steady as breath. You watch as a jug rises out of nothing. Smooth, round, perfect. He glances up, sees you watching, and smiles. You've come from the mountain, haven't you? You nod. He chuckles. It shows. You look like someone who's seen a storm try to explain itself. You laugh. Close enough. He dips his fingers into the clay again, spinning it gently. My father used to say, the gods made the world the same way we make pots. A little water, a little pressure, and a lot of mistakes. Did they ever get it right? You ask. He shrugs. You're still here, aren't you? Historians still debate whether the Greek concept of techne, craft, was considered divine imitation or divine participation. Some texts describe artisans as partners in creation, others as humble imitators. But here, in the sunlight, watching clay become vessel, the distinction feels unnecessary. You thank the potter and move on, weaving between stalls where olive oil glows like melted sunlight in glass jars. A woman selling herbs waves you over and presses a small bundle of thyme into your hand. For good dreams, she says. The mountain air doesn't leave easily. You smile, tuck it into your cloak, and keep walking. The scent follows you. Sharp, clean, alive. Everywhere you look, there's a quiet sense of continuation. Stories, gestures, trades, all inherited, all reshaped. The myths have become habits now, folded into daily life like yeast into dough. You pause by a wall painted with faint images, flaking colors of blue and gold. A man, a woman, a bolt of lightning. The paint is cracked, but the story survives. You touch the wall lightly. Still here, you whisper. The wind stirs in response, just enough to ruffle the vines. You can almost hear the mountains echo in it. Soft, content, amused. You walk on, following the sound of the sea beyond the last houses, where the world opens again into blue. By afternoon, you reach the edge of the village, a slope that spills down toward the plain. The sky above is endless, pale, full of light. You sit beneath an olive tree, its trunk gnarled and silvered with age, and watch the wind move through the leaves. They shimmer, bright on one side, dark on the other, like waves of sunlight and shadow passing through air. The sound they make isn't quite music, but close, a dry, whispering rhythm, patient and old. Historical fact: olive trees were considered sacred to Athena, and planting one near a home was believed to bring both wisdom and stability. In some villages, newlyweds planted their own tree as part of their wedding, a living symbol of endurance. An obscure tidbit. It was said that Athena's first olive tree, the one she offered Athens, was replanted every time it died. Each new tree was declared the same tree reborn. You admire that level of optimism. You lie back in the grass and watch the branches sway overhead. The light flickers through them in slow pulses. You think of how every Greek god had their domain. Storms, seas, hearths, harvests. But maybe their greatest invention was routine. Even immortals need repetition. A shepherd passes nearby, humming softly, his flock trailing behind him like wandering clouds. He nods when he sees you, and you nod back. A brief exchange between two travelers on different timelines. Historians still debate whether shepherds on Olympus's slopes genuinely believed they shared their mountain with gods, or simply liked the idea. Some records say they left offerings, others insist they just told stories by the fire to pass long nights. Maybe it was both. Myths make good company. You close your eyes. The grass is warm, the air thick with bees and sunlight. Somewhere, far above, Olympus hides behind its eternal clouds, pretending not to care. You imagine it now. The gods, invisible but ever present, leaning over the edge of their cloud palace, watching the shepherd, the potter, the baker, maybe even you. They don't speak. They don't intervene. They just watch, quietly proud, perhaps a little bored. Divine parents, content to let their creation get on with the business of living. You chuckle softly. You taught us well, you whisper. A leaf falls, landing squarely on your chest, as if to say, we know. The afternoon light thickens, warm and golden, settling into the edges of everything. The breeze slows, the birds quiet. It feels like even time has decided to take a nap. You think about all the myths, the wars, the lovers, the miracles, the punishments, and realize how they all end the same way. The gods retreat, the humans stay, the story continues, because someone still needs to bake the bread and mend the nets. You smile. The divine never disappeared. It just learned to live inside the everyday. You rest your hands behind your head, staring up through the branches. The olive leaves flicker gently against the sky, each one catching a spark of sunlight, turning ordinary light into something sacred. You close your eyes and let the sound of the wind blur into your breathing. The mountain may be far behind you now, but somehow its silence still fits perfectly in your chest. Evening gathers slowly over the valley. The heat slips away, and the air fills with the sound of cicadas tuning down for the night. The first stars appear, faint but insistent, like shy punctuation marks against a vast blue page. You sit by the olive tree a while longer, watching the horizon blur. The mountain behind you glows faintly, its outline washed in silver, not menacing, not majestic, just present, like a thought you haven't quite finished. You pull your cloak tighter and take a deep breath. The smell of the day still lingers. Warm dust, thyme, a faint hint of sea salt carried inland by some ambitious breeze. Historical fact: the ancient Greeks used the word mnemeion to describe both a monument and an act of remembering. To them, memory wasn't just mental. It was physical, something that lived in places, in stones, in the shapes of things left behind. An obscure tidbit: there's an old local saying near Olympus that goes, "The gods do not die. They change their address. It's said half seriously, half as a joke, the kind that gets passed down until no one remembers who said it first. You smile at that thought. Maybe that's what happened. Olympus just moved into language, settled down in the stories. People still tell when the night gets long and the wine runs low. You stretch your legs, listening to the rustle of leaves above. The stars brighten, steady and patient. You realize that, without meaning to, you've started matching your breathing to their rhythm. Slow, even, ancient. The nearby shepherd lights a small fire. The glow flickers across the grass, and the smell of wood smoke drifts your way. You watch as he sets out a simple meal. Bread, cheese, figs. Then, almost shyly, he places one piece of bread beside the fire, an offering, a gesture as old as the first story ever told. Historians still debate whether such offerings were made out of fear or affection, but sitting here, watching the flame, it feels like neither. It feels like gratitude, the human way of saying, "We remember you." You pick up a twig and trace a small spiral in the dirt, the same symbol you saw carved into stone on the mountain. It looks good here, framed by grass and fading light. You wonder how many others have drawn that shape, trying to capture something they couldn't name. The wind sighs softly through the olive branches, stirring the smoke. It moves around you, like a hand you can't see. "Still following me, aren't you?" you whisper. The fire crackles, and one spark leaps upward, vanishing into the dark. You take that as a yes. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the air and warmth and sound blend into a single, quiet hum. The world feels slower now, settled. The gods don't need temples tonight. They have breath and bread and memory. By the time the moon rises, the valley is half asleep. The houses glow softly, small squares of light scattered like fallen stars. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The night settles into its proper shape. You lie on your back in the grass, staring up. The stars look different here than they did on Olympus. Smaller, maybe, or just more human-sized. Still, they keep their slow conversation. Historical fact. The Greeks believed dreams traveled down from the mountains. Sleep itself was personified as Hypnos, who lived in a shadowy cave, while his brother, Morpheus, shaped the dreams that drifted toward sleeping mortals like soft weather. An obscure tidbit. In certain villages, it was said that if you slept facing Olympus, you'd dream of someone you'd lost. Not a ghost, exactly. More like a visit from a kind thought that hadn't forgotten you. You shift, getting comfortable. The grass underneath is cool, the air heavy with night flowers. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint rush of a river. It sounds like conversation, too far away to make out. You think of everything that's happened. The climb, the caves, the silent watchers, the baker's warmth, the potter's laughter. It all feels part of the same long breath, drawn by a world that never stopped believing in its own stories. Historians still debate whether myths were invented to explain nature or to survive it, but maybe they were simply the first lullabies, words meant to make the night less empty. You look up at the sky again, and for a moment, you think you see faint shapes moving in the stars. Outlines of the old gods, still at their work. Zeus leaning back, Hera unimpressed, Hermes halfway through a prank. You smile. They look tired, too. You whisper, "Don't worry, we're keeping things mostly under control." The wind answers with a small gust, that feels suspiciously like approval. The moon drifts higher, bright enough to silver the olive leaves. You turn onto your side, the earth cool beneath your cheek. Somewhere nearby, the shepherd's fire still burns, a tiny golden heartbeat in the dark. You think of the spiral you drew earlier and realize it's everywhere. In the wind, in the stars, in the pulse beneath your hand. A reminder that every story eventually circles back to quiet. You close your eyes. The sound of the river blends with the wind, with your breathing, with the memory of the mountain's hum. Sleep comes slowly, carefully, like an old friend sitting beside you, without a word. The last thing you hear before drifting off is the soft rustle of the trees, whispering the same thing they've whispered for thousands of years. You made it back. The day has climbed halfway across the sky. You sit by the shore now, far from Olympus, watching light move across the water in long, slow ripples. The sea breathes in and out, steady as a giant asleep. The pebble from the mountain rests in your palm. It's warm from the sun, smooth against your skin. And when you hold it to your ear, just for curiosity's sake, you could almost swear you hear wind, not loud, just the faint whisper of altitude carried all this way. You think of everything that's happened, the climb, the cave, the bread, the laughter, the silence. They feel less like chapters now, and more like heartbeats, each one slow, deliberate, enough. Historical fact. In ancient Greek poetry, endings were rarely endings. They used the word telos, which meant not stop, but fulfillment, the natural pause after completion, an obscure tidbit. The same word described a perfect cup of wine, filled just to the rim, no more, no less. You take a deep breath and let it out through a smile. The story is full. It doesn't need to end loudly. The breeze off the water smells faintly of salt and thyme. Gulls drift overhead, tracing slow circles. The waves lap at the rocks in lazy applause. You think, maybe Olympus was never meant to stay in the clouds. Maybe it wanted to come down here all along, to sit beside fires, to taste bread, to listen to people laugh at the absurdity of being alive. Historians still debate what made the myths last so long. Maybe it's because they were never really about gods. They were about noticing, about paying attention long enough for the ordinary to turn holy. The sunlight softens. The air thickens with warmth and hush. Each sound, water, wind, your own breathing, slides into the next until there's no border between them. You lean back on your elbows, eyes half closed, and let the world slow to its quietest setting. The waves murmur their endless sentences. The horizon hums. Somewhere far behind you, Olympus dissolves, back into cloud, still watching, still amused. The breeze touches your face, gentle as a goodnight hand. You let your eyelids drift lower. Thoughts blur. The sea keeps breathing. The mountain keeps dreaming. Everything that mattered has already been said. Everything unsaid hums softly, perfectly fine to stay that way. You exhale, long and slow. Now the story folds itself shut. Not finished, just resting. Sleep well, traveler. You've made it all the way down.